Hi friends, my name is Anna Crowley Redding and I'm the author of this book, Rescuing the Declaration of Independence, How We Almost Lost the Words That Built America. I know you must be spending a lot of time inside right now. I am too. But in Maine, the great thing about it is that sometimes there's enough of a chill in the air to justify having a fire in the fireplace. So I built us a fire today so we could have a cozy spot to read this book. So let's dive in. This book is illustrated by the fabulously talented Edwin Fotheringham. Not long after revolutionary Americans battled the British to become the land of the free, America was at war with England once again. And in 1814, as British ships sailed along the American coast, suspicion swirled in Washington that England wanted to humiliate the young country by burning its new capital to the ground. Secretary of State James Monroe had to know if the rumor was true. After all, he was one of the president's most trusted advisors. Monroe galloped toward a tiny town in Maryland. Perched atop a hill, he spied thousands of redcoats spilling out of enemy ships. Their target was clear: Washington. Monroe's heart sank. He knew the capital city was unprotected, undefended, unable to fight off an attack. Grabbing a quill and paper, Monroe scribbled out 2 warnings, one for his clerk and one for President James Madison. And then he ordered a mounted soldier to rush those worrisome words to Washington as quickly as possible. A cloud of dust followed the soldier as he raced through the sweltering August heat, down the streets of Washington to the White House, and then to the State Department in search of Monroe's clerk. Stephen Pleasanton knew his boss was spying on the enemy, but he had no idea the British were coming. In fact, armed with a letter opener, Stephen was busy doing what he always did: reading notes, writing letters, organizing, and recording the recordables accordingly. As a clerk, Stephen lived and breathed paper. His job was not a powerful post, but it came with a particularly spectacular perk. If Stephen wanted to remember why America declared herself the land of the free, all he had to do was to look up from his work. The original Declaration of Independence hung on the wall. And if Stephen needed to defend his right to justice, liberty, and freedom of speech, why not grab a hold of the original U.S. Constitution and point to the perfect spot? From the front door to the attic, his office was filled with George Washington's letters, the Bill of Rights, the Articles of Confederation, journals, and books. Each piece of paper and parchment had a role in founding the country. Yes, Stephen Pleasanton knew paper, but none of that prepared him for the urgent message from the front lines, delivered by a mounted soldier at full gallop. Holding the letter, Stephen's heart pounded. His eyes quickly scanned each line. The last 3 words sent a chill down Stephen's spine. Remove the records. Stephen knew exactly which records his boss was talking about. The words that built America. Stephen's mind raced as he faced the fact that he was standing between British torches and the greatest documents in the land. In the name of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, Stephen had to save them. But how would he carry stacks of paper, reams of records, and bundles of books to safety? He needed bags and lots of them, and there was no time to waste. As the 2 other clerks prepared the paper for packing, Stephen bolted from the building to purchase fabric to be made into sturdy sacks. Stephen stepped into the streets to find Washington erupting in chaos. News of the invasion was spreading fast. Militias gathered on the greens to prepare for battle. Stephen threaded through the crowded streets to the nearest shop. Grabbing a bolt of coarse linen, he ran his hand over the material. This would be strong enough to carry America's ideas, beliefs, and rules of law to safety. He ripped the cloth into large pieces while the merchant stitched them into sacks. Seconds ticked by, minutes, hours, then the last rip and the final stitch. Stephen whisked the bags back to his office. Fingers bending and tucking, Stephen joined his fellow clerks as the men carefully rolled the documents into scrolls, working their way through 3 floors. Surely by now the British were not far away. Stephen had to get those sacks out of town, and fast. He needed wagons and lots of them. But from where? From whom? Suddenly a booming voice froze Stephen where he stood. He found himself cornered by the Secretary of War. General John Armstrong was the most powerful military man in the country. He reported directly to the president. The general demanded to know exactly what all the fuss was about. Stephen explained that the British were coming. The general scoffed at the very notion of such silliness. Ridiculous, preposterous, wrong. In the general's not-so-humble opinion, he believed the British would never bother with Washington. After all, the capital was more pasture and swamp than grand government center. Even though there were big plans for pleasing promenades, gorgeous gardens, and astonishing architecture, at that very moment, Washington was little more than a beautiful city to be. And once the general's mind was made up, he would not budge an inch, no matter what. Stephen Pleasanton thought about the documents he was trusted to protect, and the British boots marching ever closer. He may not have been loud or rude, but when it came to the safety of America's words, he would not budge an inch either. The lowly clerk mustered whatever courage he could and politely told the general they would have to agree to disagree. Then Stephen stepped aside and he got back to work. As the general stormed off in a huff, Stephen hustled into the street once more to find transportation. Dust hung in the air as fully loaded wagons jammed the roads. People were evacuating with as many possessions as they could carry. Wading through the panicked crowd, Stephen began to yell for help. In the name of the United States of America! He flagged down families, merchants, anyone with a cart or wagon, and convinced them to haul his precious cargo safely out of town. They lugged, lobbed, and lifted every last sack into the wagons until they overflowed. But where would the documents be safe? Stephen remembered an old grist mill 2 miles north of Georgetown. It was abandoned, with plenty of room, and its thick walls would surely keep these national treasures safe. With a snap of the reins, the drivers were off. Soaked in sweat, Stephen ran back into the house for one last look. Glancing around the room, Stephen's eyes bulged. They had missed one. There, hanging proudly on the wall, was the Declaration of Independence. Of all the things to leave behind, Stephen pried the parchment from its frame and darted out the door. Mounting his horse, Stephen raced into the night. Crossing the Potomac, he scanned every shadow, rock, and crevice for redcoats. But as he made his way to the mill, he realized he was galloping ever closer to another important building, a munitions factory. It was a place where rifles, gunpowder, and cannons were made, the perfect target for an attack. And it was only 2 miles from the grist mill. If enemy troops targeted the factory, all it would take was a spy or traitor to tip them off about the greatest trophy of all, America's founding documents. They were still in danger. Stephen's horse's clattering hooves halted at the mill's front steps. Body aching, bleary-eyed, he stared at the massive pile of bags and then at his exhausted co-workers. There was no other choice. The documents had to be moved again. So Stephen rode from farm to farm, calling out for help, and again, everyday Americans came to the rescue. As the sun rose, Stephen led a train of wagons deeper into Virginia. After 35 long, bumpy miles, they rolled to a stop outside Leesburg, Virginia. A reverend brought them to an empty mansion with a brick vault. It was perfect. The documents would be safe here. Hours later, after stashing sack after sack, Stephen's job was done. He closed the door and locked the mansion. Ducking into the closest tavern, Stephen staggered into a guest room and he collapsed into the bed. While he slept, an orange glow flickered on the horizon. Washington was burning. The White House, the Capitol, and Stephen's office were all ablaze. Stephen would soon awake to the news that the British seized Washington. But while the Redcoats destroyed the buildings, they did not erase the words that founded a nation. When it was safe, Stephen Pleasanton would return those all-important words to Washington to shine as a guiding light. In fact, if you need to remember why America declared herself the land of the free, you can read the original Declaration of Independence for yourself. And should you need to defend your right to justice, liberty, and freedom of speech, you can inspect the original U.S. Constitution and point to the perfect spot. All because an ordinary clerk did an extraordinary thing. While Stephen Pleasanton's heroic ride may have faded from memory, the words that built this country never have and never will. The end. I hope you enjoyed the story, and I hope you enjoy reading while you're at home.